Try not to trip, sweetie." The words were loud enough for everyone on the pier to hear. The laughter came before I even placed my second foot onto the gangway. For a second, I considered pretending I hadn't heard him. 23 years in uniform had taught me that not every insult deserved a response. Some people embarrass themselves without any help. Still, those words hit differently. Not because they hurt, because they reminded me of the hundreds of people who had looked at my prosthetic leg and decided they already knew my story. Weak, broken, finished. None of them had any idea who I really was. The man standing above me wore 4 gold stripes on his sleeves. His white navy dress uniform looked perfectly pressed, not a wrinkle anywhere. His name tag read Captain Trevor Ashby. He smiled as if he'd just told the funniest joke in the world. Around him, junior officers laughed politely. Some sailors looked uncomfortable. Others stared at the deck, pretending not to hear. No one wanted to be the first person to disagree with a captain. I adjusted the strap of my sea bag and kept walking. Every step of my prosthetic made the familiar metallic click against the gangway. Click. Step. Click. Step. I'd lived with that sound for 12 years. To me, it sounded like survival. To Captain Ashby, apparently, it sounded like entertainment. "You sure you don't need someone to hold your hand?" he called after me. More laughter. I finally looked up at him. "I'll manage, Captain." I kept my voice calm. People often expect anger. Silence unsettles them much more. He folded his arms. "I certainly hope so." Then he glanced toward the welcome party. "We don't want anyone falling overboard before lunch." Even more laughter. The sailors standing nearby forced awkward smiles. A young petty officer looked embarrassed enough that I almost felt sorry for him. He wasn't laughing because he thought it was funny. He was laughing because the captain was. That's how fear works. I reached the top of the gangway and stepped onto the flight deck. The Pacific breeze carried the smell of salt water, fuel, and steel. Home. For most people, a warship feels intimidating. To me, it always felt familiar. Steel decks, running lights, the vibration beneath your boots, voices over the ship's speakers. I'd spent nearly half my adult life surrounded by sounds exactly like these. I wasn't here for a ceremony. I wasn't here asking for sympathy. I had been invited. Officially. The Navy had requested my presence for a leadership symposium aboard the carrier. My job was simple. Speak to young officers about leadership under pressure. Share lessons learned from combat. Answer questions. Then fly home. That was supposed to be it. Instead, before I'd even checked in, I'd become today's entertainment. Captain Ashby looked at the clipboard in his hand. "So?" He squinted. "Retired Senior Chief Emma Carter." He shrugged. "I thought they'd be sending someone different." I smiled politely. "Different how?" He hesitated just long enough. "I don't know." His eyes drifted briefly toward my prosthetic. "I guess I expected someone who looked more." He never finished the sentence. He didn't have to. Healthy. Whole. Military enough. I'd heard every version before. I signed the visitor log without saying another word. One of the ensigns quietly handed me my visitor badge. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he whispered. I looked at him. "For what?" He glanced toward the captain. "You didn't deserve that." I smiled. "Thank you." That simple kindness meant more than he probably realized. Sometimes one decent person can outweigh 10 cruel ones. As we began walking across the deck, I noticed sailors stealing quick glances at me, not because of my leg. Because word had already spread. The captain had mocked the guest. News travels faster than helicopters aboard a Navy ship. Captain Ashby walked ahead, clearly pleased with himself. He spoke loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "We've been trying to improve morale around here." He looked back over his shoulder. "I suppose laughter counts." Some officers chuckled again. Others stayed silent. Then something unexpected happened. An older enlisted sailor stepped out from a maintenance crew near the aircraft elevator. His hair was almost completely gray. His uniform showed decades of service. The gold fall anchor on his collar identified him immediately. "Master Chief." He stopped walking. His eyes narrowed. He stared directly at me. At first, I assumed he was simply trying to remember where we'd met. Military life is small. People cross paths all the time. Then his expression, his eyes widened, almost disbelief. He removed his cover. "Senior Chief Carter." I blinked. "Yes?" He took 2 quick steps forward. "Emma Carter." Now I recognized him too. The years had changed his face. But not his voice. "Master Chief Donovan." His smile spread instantly. "My God." Before I could react, he pulled me into a respectful hug. "I thought you retired years ago." I did. He stepped back, shaking his head with a grin. "I can't believe it's really you." Around us, the entire deck had gone strangely quiet. Captain Ashby looked annoyed. "You two know each other." Master Chief Donovan slowly turned toward him. His smile disappeared. "Know her." His voice had changed completely. Every nearby sailor seemed to stop breathing. "I served under her." Ashby frowned. "Oh," Donovan continued. "I also watched her save 36 sailors." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Ashby's smile faded. "I watched her carry wounded Marines while bleeding herself." Silence. I watched her refuse evacuation until every junior sailor made it onto the helicopter. The captain shifted uncomfortably. Donovan wasn't finished. I watched her receive recommendations for honors most people only read about. The air suddenly felt much heavier. Captain Ashby's confident posture began to crack. He looked around. I wasn't aware. Donovan replied evenly. You clearly weren't. Several officers nearby exchanged nervous looks. Even the sailors who had laughed moments earlier now stared at the deck. Donovan looked back at me. You never told them. I shrugged. It never came up. He gave a quiet laugh. Of course it didn't. Then he turned toward the captain one last time. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Every person on that flight deck heard every single word. Captain. He paused. Do you have any idea whose career you just mocked? The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced aboard a Navy ship. No engines. No conversations. No louder, just hundreds of eyes moving from Captain Ashby to me. No one spoke for several long seconds after Master Chief Donovan asked the captain that question. Captain, do you have any idea whose career you just mocked? The silence was almost painful. Captain Ashby's face had gone pale. His confidence, which had filled the flight deck only moments before, was disappearing one piece at a time. He cleared his throat. I wasn't given much information about our guest. Donovan looked at him without blinking. Respect shouldn't require a personnel file. No one dared to interrupt. I stepped forward before the situation became even more uncomfortable. It's all right, Master Chief. He looked at me. No. It isn't. I smiled gently. I've dealt with worse. That part was true. A careless joke had never been the hardest thing I'd survived. Not even close. An hour later, I was sitting alone in the ship's conference room overlooking the flight deck. The ocean stretched endlessly beyond the windows. Jets launched from the carrier one after another, each takeoff shaking the room slightly. The sound always brought back memories. Some good, some I had spent years trying to forget. A young lieutenant knocked softly on the open door. Senior Chief Carter. Come in. He carried 2 cups of coffee. I thought you might like one. I smiled. Thank you. He hesitated before sitting down. I hope you don't mind me asking, I laughed. That's usually how difficult questions begin. He smiled nervously. Master Chief Donovan said you saved 36 sailors. I looked down at my coffee. Something like that. What really happened? For several seconds, I simply stared through the window. The answer wasn't short, and it wasn't simple. It started in Afghanistan. 12 years earlier, I had both of my legs then. I could outrun most of the younger sailors on base. Back then I believed I was invincible. Most of us did. I had already served 11 years and had completed deployments across the Middle East. Danger had become routine. Too routine. That's what makes combat truly dangerous. The day you stop fearing it. Our team had been assigned to support a joint operation involving Navy personnel, Marines, and Army Special Forces. The intelligence sounded straightforward. Escort a humanitarian convoy. Deliver medical supplies. Return before sunset. Simple. Except nothing about war is ever simple. About 30 miles outside the village, our convoy entered a narrow canyon. I remember noticing how quiet everything suddenly became. No children. No animals. No wind. Just silence. I didn't like it. I radioed the convoy commander. Something feels wrong. But before he could answer, the mountain exploded. The first blast threw our lead vehicle completely off the road. Dust swallowed everything, then came gunfire. From both sides, automatic weapons. Rocket-propelled grenades, the radio filled with overlapping voices. Ambus! Driver downs! We're pinned. Chaos. Pure chaos. Training takes over during moments like that. Fear comes later. I sprinted toward the second vehicle. Bullets slammed into the dirt around my boots. One Marine had taken shrapnel across his shoulder. Another couldn't move his left arm. I dragged both behind cover. Then I heard screaming from farther up the road. Our transport truck. The one carrying communications specialists. The explosion had flipped it onto its side. Smoke poured from the engine compartment. Fuel leaked underneath. If the fire reached one, no one inside would survive. Someone grabbed my arm. Emma. It was Donovan. Back then he was only a chief petty officer. You can't reach them. The whole hillside is firing. I know. He tried again. You'll get yourself killed. I looked him straight in the eye. Not today. I ran. To this day I still don't remember deciding. My body simply moved. Bullets cracked past my ears. The truck burned hotter with every second. I climbed onto the overturned side and kicked through a damaged window. Inside, everything was upside down. Men were trapped beneath twisted metal. One sailor was unconscious. Another had a broken leg. Someone shouted my name. Another was praying. The smell of smoke filled the compartment. I knew we had minutes, maybe less. One by one, I pulled them out. Some could crawl, others couldn't. Every trip back across open ground felt longer than the last. The enemy kept firing. Twice bullets struck the truck inches from my head. Still, there were more people inside. I went back, again and again. By the sixth trip, my lungs burned from smoke. Blood ran into my left eye from a cut above my forehead. I barely noticed. The only thing that mattered was counting. 21. 28. 31. Every number meant another life. Another family that wouldn't receive a folded flag. When I reached the truck again, Donovan was already helping carry survivors away. "You've got everyone?" he yelled. I shook my head. "No. There are still 5. He stared at the burning vehicle. The flames were spreading beneath it. Everyone nearby knew what that meant. If the ammunition inside ignited, the explosion would destroy everything nearby. I climbed back in anyway. The last 5 sailors were trapped under collapsed equipment. One of them couldn't have been older than 19. His hands shook uncontrollably. "I don't want to die." Those words still visit me at night. I grabbed his shoulder. "You're not going to?" "We're trapped." "Not anymore. Adrenaline gives people impossible strength." I lifted twisted steel that should have required 2 people. I don't know how. I only know that somehow it moved. One by one they crawled free. The youngest sailor refused to leave without helping another injured friend. Even then, he thought of someone else first. That made me smile. There was still hope. We reached the exit. 4 escaped. The 5th didn't make it. His boot caught beneath a crushed support beam. I pulled. Nothing again. Nothing. Then I heard it. A loud metallic pop beneath the truck. Fuel reaching the fire. He looked at me. "Go? I'm not leaving?" "You have said no." He smiled. A scared 19-year-old trying to comfort me. "My mom always said heroes don't quit." I pulled harder. Still nothing. Then, everything became white. The explosion threw me nearly 30 feet. I remember flying. I remember silence. Then darkness. When I opened my eyes, the sky looked strangely peaceful. For a moment I thought the battle had ended. Then I tried to stand. Nothing happened. I looked down. My right leg was gone. The pain arrived a second later. So intense that I couldn't even scream. I simply stared. A medic slid beside me. I looked past him. The convoy. The smoke. The helicopters finally arriving. Donovan running toward me. Someone shouted, "She's still breathing." Another voice answered, "Get her on the bird." I remember grabbing Donovan's sleeve. "Did we get them?" Looked away. I already knew the answer. 36. 36 came home. 1 didn't. I carried that number with me every day since. I spent 11 months learning how to walk again. At first, I hated the prosthetic. Every step reminded me of what I'd lost. Then one afternoon, my physical therapist stopped me. "Emma? What? You're looking at this the wrong way." "I lost my leg." "Yes, but you didn't lose yourself." Those words changed everything. Eventually, the clicking sound of the prosthetic stopped reminding me of loss. It reminding me that I was still moving forward. 2. The young lieutenant across the table hadn't said a word. His coffee had gone cold. I had no idea. He whispered. I smiled softly. Most people don't. He looked toward the flight deck. "Then why didn't you tell Captain Ashby?" I looked out at the ocean again. "Because real service isn't about reminding people what you've done." I paused. "It's about what you do next." At that exact moment, a knock sounded on the conference room door. Master Chief Donovan stepped inside. His expression was serious. "Emma, what is it?" He closed the door behind him. "Washington just called." My stomach tightened. "About what?" He looked directly into my eyes. "They've opened an official review. Off Captain Ashby." Donovan slowly shook his head. "No." His next sentence made my heart stop. "They're reopening the mission in Afghanistan. For 12 years, I believed that chapter of my life had finally been closed. I was wrong. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. They're reopening the mission." A Master Chief Donovan nodded slowly. "I received the call from Naval Personnel Command 5 minutes ago." The room suddenly felt much smaller. For 12 years, I had convinced myself that Afghanistan was behind me. The nightmares had faded. The surgeries were over. I had learned to walk again. I had retired with honor. I had built a quiet life. And now, someone had decided to open a door that should have stayed closed. "What changed?" I asked. Donovan sighed. "They didn't say much over the phone, but they gave you something. They found new operational records." I frowned. "Records?" "They believe part of mission report was altered before it reached Washington." Those words hit harder than I expected. Altered. Military reports don't simply change by accident. Someone signs them. Someone approves them. Someone benefits from them. I leaned back in my chair. "Who requested the review?" Donovan looked at me carefully. "The Inspector General's office." That wasn't routine. If the Inspector General became involved, this was no longer about paperwork. It was about accountability. An hour later, I stood alone on the flight deck. The afternoon sun reflected off rows of parked aircraft. Sailors moved with practiced precision, each person focused on a specific task. Watching them reminded me why I had served for so many years. Not because the military was perfect. It wasn't. But because most of the people wearing the uniform believed in something larger than themselves. That belief deserved to be protected, even from those wearing the highest ranks. Footsteps approached behind me. Captain Ashby, Senior Chief Carter. I turned. His confidence had changed. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something closer to uncertainty. I owe you an apology? I nodded politely. You do. He looked down before meeting my eyes again. What I said this morning was unacceptable. Less. I judged you before I knew anything about you? I folded my arms. No, Captain. He looked confused. You judged me because you saw a prosthetic. He didn't answer. That's very different. The silence between us stretched. Finally, he spoke. I've spent my career teaching young officers to respect people. I gave him a sad smile. Then today became a lesson. He accepted that without argument. I'm sorry. This time, I believed he meant it. Whether that apology would matter later, I wasn't sure. That evening, Donovan invited me to the chief's mess. The room was quieter than usual. Several senior enlisted leaders stood when I entered, not because regulations required it, because respect did. One by one, they introduced themselves. Some had served with people I knew. Others had only heard stories. One master chief placed an old photograph on the table. You remembered it up. Dust, mountains, a convoy. 37 exhausted faces staring into the camera. One face was missing. Private Daniel Ruiz, 19 years old, the young soldier whose boot had become trapped. I closed my eyes. I've never forgotten him. No one here has. E2 Donovan pointed toward the bottom corner of the photograph. There. I looked closer. Standing several feet behind our convoy commander was another officer hidden. I frowned. I don't remember him. You shouldn't. Why? He wasn't supposed to be there. The room became silent. What do you mean? I arrived 2 days before the mission. Temporary assignment. Donovan nodded. Only for the operation. What was his name? He slid another folder across the table. I opened it. Inside was an old deployment roster. Halfway down the page, my heartbeat stopped. Lieutenant Commander Trevor Ashby. I stared at the name. No. Donovan didn't speak. Same man. I looked back at the photograph. He looked younger, much younger. But it was him. The officer who had mocked me that morning had been present the day I lost my leg. 2. Memory works in strange ways. Sometimes one small detail unlocks an entire room you've kept sealed for years. Suddenly, fragments returned. A command vehicle. Radio arguments. Someone insisting we continue into the canyon. I closed my eyes. Then I heard it in the room, inside my memory. A voice over the radio. We're behind schedule. Another voice answered. The road isn't secure. Then, worm opened my eyes. Oh my God. Donovan nodded slowly. You remember? I know that voice. He didn't interrupt. Neither did anyone else. The room waited. I argued against entering that canyon. You did? Our reconnaissance drone hadn't returned. Correct. I requested a delay. You requested 30 minutes. I looked back at the deployment report. Who denied it? Donovan answered quietly. Ashby. The room fell silent again. I couldn't breathe. Not because of anger, because of disbelief. For 12 years, I believed the ambush had simply been bad luck. Now, it appeared someone had ignored multiple warnings. Warnings that might have prevented the entire attack. Was that in the official report? Donovan shook his head. No. What did it say? Equipment failure. I laughed once. Not because anything was funny. Because sometimes the truth is so unbelievable. You laugh before you cry. They blamed equipment. There wasn't poor visibility. We know. The drone footage. Missing. The radio recordings. Also missing. I looked around the room. Someone erased everything. No one disagreed. The next morning, representatives from Washington arrived aboard the carrier. Civilian investigators, Navy legal officers, an inspector general team. Word spread quickly. No one knew exactly why they were there. Rumors traveled through the ship like electricity. Some believed it involved procurement. Others suspected classified operations. Very few guessed the truth. Captain Ashby was called into a private conference room at 0900s. He remained inside for nearly 2 hours. When he finally stepped out, he looked 10 years older. His executive officer quietly approached him. Sir? Ashby removed his cover and rubbed his forehead. They know, 3 words, barely above a whisper. But I heard them. So did Donovan. That afternoon, I received my own request. The lead investigator wanted to interview me. I entered the room expecting routine questions. Instead, she placed an evidence folder on the table. Senior Chief Carter. She opened it. Where recovered this from a classified archive 3 weeks ago. Inside was a damaged hard drive, burned around the edges. Recovered from Afghanistan. She slid a photograph beside it. I believe you've seen this before. It was the communications truck. The same one I had entered 6 times. The same truck that exploded. Then she asked the question I never expected. Did anyone ever tell you that the truck continued recording after the explosion? Every sound in the room disappeared. I stared at her. No. She nodded. It did. She pressed a button. An audio file appeared on the screen. "You're the first person outside this investigation who will hear it." My hands began to shake, because somewhere inside that damaged recording was a voice from 12 years ago, a voice that could finally reveal who made the decision that changed dozens of lives forever. The investigator looked at me. "Are you ready?" I wasn't. But after 12 years, the truth finally was. The investigator looked at me one final time. "Whenever you're ready." I took a slow breath and nodded. She pressed the play button. At first, all I heard was static. Then the familiar sounds of the convoy returned. Engines. Radio chatter. The wind moving through the canyon. Even after 12 years, I recognized every sound. Then a voice came over the radio. "Recon drone has not completed the sweep." Another voice answered. "Recommend delaying movement 30 minutes." My heart started beating faster. That was exactly how I remembered it. Then came another voice. Confident, impatient. "I've reviewed the schedule. We move now." I closed my eyes. I knew that voice. Trevor Ashby. Back then, he had been a young lieutenant commander with something to prove. The recording continued. A communications officer spoke next. "Sir, intelligence still lists possible enemy activity." Ashby's answer came immediately. "We're already behind schedule." A brief silence followed. Then one final warning. "Sir, this route hasn't been cleared." Ashby's reply was only 4 words. "That's an acceptable risk." The room fell silent. The recording ended a few seconds later. No one said a word. The investigator finally looked at me. "Senior Chief Carter. We found no evidence that this recording was ever in the official investigation." I stared at the speaker on the table. For 12 years, families had believed the attack was unavoidable. 36 survivors had blamed themselves. I had blamed myself. And all that time, the warnings had existed. Someone had simply buried them. Later that afternoon, Captain Trevor Ashby was escorted into another conference room. This time, I was already inside. The lead investigator sat at one end of the table. 2 Navy legal officers sat beside her. Master Chief Donovan stood quietly near the wall. Ashby walked in, saw me, and stopped. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he took his seat. The investigator began calmly. "Captain Ashby, we've recovered operational evidence connected to Operation Iron Canyon." His face remained expressionless. "I understand. We've also confirmed that portions of the original mission report were altered before submission." He swallowed, but said nothing. The investigator continued. "Can you explain why multiple safety warnings were removed from the final report?" Ashby lowered his eyes. The silence stretched. Finally, he spoke. "I was young." No one responded. "I thought completing the mission was more important than delaying it." He paused. "I believed I was making the right decision." I looked directly at him. "And afterward?" He didn't answer. "You knew what happened." Still nothing. "You knew people died." His shoulders slumped. "Yes." "You knew the report wasn't accurate." A whisper escaped his lip. "Yes. So why didn't you tell the truth?" For the first time since I'd met him, Captain Trevor Ashby looked completely defeated. His voice cracked. "Because I was afraid. Not afraid of the enemy. Not afraid of combat. Afraid of losing his career." I leaned back in my chair. "You know what the difference is between us, Captain?" He slowly looked up. "I lost a leg. You lost your integrity." The room became completely silent. "I learned how to walk again. You spent 12 years running from the truth." No one interrupted. No one needed to. The investigation lasted 3 more days. Dozens of witnesses were interviewed. Old communications logs were examined. Deployment records were compared. The recovered audio was verified by independent analysts. Every conclusion pointed in the same direction. The ambush itself could not have been completely prevented. War never offers guarantees. But the evidence showed something just as important. The convoy should never have entered that canyon when it did. The delay I had requested was reasonable. The warnings had been legitimate, and they had been ignored. On the final morning, the crew gathered in the carrier's hangar bay. No one officially announced why. Word had simply spread. The commanding admiral stepped onto the platform. Captain Ashby stood several feet away in full-dress uniform. He looked exhausted. The admiral spoke with steady confidence. "Our profession is built on trust." He paused. "Without trust, rank has no meaning." The entire hangar remained silent. He continued. "Leadership is not measured by power. It is measured by responsibility." Then came the announcement. Captain Trevor Ashby was officially relieved of command, pending final administrative action. No one cheered. No one celebrated. Because the Navy wasn't witnessing revenge. It was witnessing accountability. Ashby removed his command pin slowly. For a brief moment, our eyes met. He gave me a small nod. Not asking for forgiveness. Simply acknowledging the truth. I returned the nod. Some burdens are too heavy for words. That afternoon, I finally delivered the leadership seminar I had originally been invited to give. More than 300 sailors attended. No one laughed when I walked onto the stage. I stood behind the podium and looked across the room. Young faces. Experienced faces. Future leaders. I smiled. I wasn't planning to change my speech. A few quiet smiles appeared. But I think recent events have already written a better lesson. The room listened carefully. I've served beside heroes. I've buried friends. I've made mistakes. I've survived things I never imagined. I paused. And I've learned one truth that matters more than any medal. I tapped my prosthetic lightly. This doesn't define me. The room remained completely still. What defines me is every decision I made after losing it. I looked across the audience. One day, every one of you will have authority over someone else's future. On that day, choose humility, choose honesty, and never confuse rank with character. A long silence followed. Then the applause began. Not loud at first. Just a few hands, then more. Soon, the entire room was standing. The applause continued for nearly a full minute. Not because of me. Because every sailor in that room understood what honor truly meant. As I prepared to leave the carrier later that evening, Donovan walked beside me toward the gangway. You know, he said with a grin, this isn't exactly how anyone expected your visit to go. I laughed. No. He looked at my prosthetic. You still hear the clicking? Every day. What does it sound like now? I looked out across the ocean. It sounds like another chance. He smiled. I like that. Before boarding the launch that would take me ashore, I stopped and looked back one final time at the ship. At the sailors lining the rails. At the flag waving in the sea breeze. At the place where my past had unexpectedly caught up with me. For years, I believed courage meant charging into danger without fear. Age taught me something different. Real courage is telling the truth, even when that truth costs everything. I turned toward the water and took my first step down the gangway. Click, step, click, step. The sound echoed softly across the steel deck. Once, that sound reminded me of what I had lost. Now it reminded me of everything I had survived, because scars may tell people where you've been. But your character tells them where you're going. And no one can take that away from you. For the first time since I stepped aboard, the captain wasn't smiling. And somehow, I had the feeling this was only the beginning. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more story.